Title, Get Him Out. HOA Karen called cops to my 5M estate. The deputy walked in. Good to see you, sir. Scene 1, hook opening injustice. There was a sheriff's cruiser in my driveway. I was standing on my own front porch, holding a glass of iced tea, watching a woman I barely knew point at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered onto someone else's lawn. Behind her, 2 men in polo shirts stood with their arms crossed, board members, I'd later learn. And behind them, a deputy was stepping out of his vehicle, hand resting on his belt. "That's him," she said, loud enough for the entire cul-de-sac to hear. "That's the one. Get him out." She had a clipboard. She always had a clipboard. On it was a stack of printed violation notices, and she was waving them at the deputy like they were a warrant. Her name was Diane Kowalski, HOA president for the past 6 years, and she had just called the county sheriff's department to have me removed from my own home. "Officer, this individual is an unauthorized occupant," she announced, stepping ahead of the deputy as if she were leading the operation. "The HOA has jurisdiction here. We need him off the property." One of the board members chimed in. "We've documented everything. He has no right to be here." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I took a sip of my tea and watched. Diane marched up the walkway. She peeled a violation notice off her clipboard and slapped it against my front door, right next to the doorbell camera that had been recording since the moment her car pulled up. Red header, bold print, $2,500 fine, violation of community bylaw 11.4C. I'd checked the CC&Rs twice since moving in. There was no bylaw 11.4C. She had invented it. "We represent 96 homeowners in this community," she said, turning back to the deputy with a rehearsed confidence that almost made it sound real. "We decide who stays and who goes." The deputy didn't respond to her. He walked past her, came up the porch steps, looked at me, and then he extended his hand. "Good to see you, sir. It's been a while." The handshake lasted about 3 seconds, but the silence from Diane Kowalski lasted much longer. She stood on my front lawn, mouth half open, eyes jumping between me and the deputy like she was watching a movie with a scene missing. The board members behind her exchanged a glance. One of them took a small step backward. The deputy turned to her. "Ma'am, what exactly is the issue here?" Diane recovered fast. I'll give her that. She held up her clipboard and launched into it. Unauthorized structures, unpaid fines, failure to comply, hostile behavior toward the board. She spoke for nearly 2 minutes without stopping, rattling off accusations like she'd been practicing in the mirror. The deputy listened. He didn't interrupt. And when she finished, he asked one question. "Do you have a court order?" "I don't need a court order. I'm the president of the—" "Ma'am?" He said it once, calm, final. "Without a court order, no one's being removed from their own property." I watched Diane's jaw tighten. She looked at me like I had cheated, like I had broken a rule she hadn't written yet. Across the street, I could see Mrs. Shelton watching from behind her curtain. 2 doors down, Mr. Tanaka had stopped washing his car and was standing in his driveway with the hose still running, staring. A teenager on a bicycle had slowed to a stop at the corner. Everyone saw it. The president of the HOA standing on a homeowner's lawn with 2 board members and a sheriff's deputy being told, politely, clearly, that she had no authority here. She didn't apologize. She didn't back down. She straightened her clipboard, turned to the board members and said, "We'll escalate this, legally." Then she walked to her car, got in, and drove away without looking back. The deputy stayed for a few minutes. We talked, mostly small talk, catching up. He told me he'd been assigned to this district about 8 months ago. Before he left, he said something I filed away. "She's called us before, different homeowners, same story." I stood on the porch and watched his cruiser pull out of my driveway. The red violation notice was still stuck to my door. I peeled it off, read it one more time. $2,500, bylaw 11.4C. A rule that didn't exist, issued by a woman who believed she owned this neighborhood. I folded it and placed it in my desk drawer, on top of a manila folder that was still mostly empty. It wouldn't stay empty for long. She had no idea that the man she wanted dragged off this porch had helped train half the deputies in this county, and the one she'd just called was no exception. Karen had made a lot of mistakes that afternoon. She called the police on a homeowner standing on his own property. She fabricated a bylaw that didn't exist. She slapped a fraudulent fine on a door that had a camera recording every second. But her biggest mistake was simpler than all of that. She assumed that nobody in this neighborhood would ever push back. She was about to find out what happens when someone does. Scene 2, HOA and Karen backstory set up. I moved into the house 3 years before the cruiser showed up in my driveway. It wasn't the kind of purchase you make to impress people. I'd spent 22 years in law enforcement training, running defensive tactics courses, consulting with departments across the state, building curriculum for academy recruits. When I retired, I didn't want a condo in the city or a cabin in the middle of nowhere. I wanted land. I wanted quiet. I wanted a place where I could sit on the porch in the morning and hear nothing but birds and the occasional lawnmower 2 streets over. The house had that. 5 bedrooms I didn't need, a backyard that backed up to a tree line, and a neighborhood that looked like the kind of place where people minded their own business. I paid cash, closed clean, moved in on a Tuesday, and by Thursday I'd already introduced myself to 3 neighbors. Mrs. Shelton, the widow 2 doors east, brought me a bundt cake. Mr. Tanaka across the street waved from his garage and told me where to find the best hardware store in town. A younger couple at the end of the cul-de-sac dropped off a welcome card their kids had signed. It felt like the right place. Then I went to my first HOA meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse. A plain room with folding chairs, fluorescent lights, and a long table at the front where the board sat. About 20 homeowners showed up. I went out of courtesy, nothing more. I figured it would be the usual. Budget review, pool schedule, maybe a discussion about holiday decorations. What I walked into was something else entirely. Diane Kowalski sat at the center of the board table like it was a bench. She didn't open with a greeting. She opened with a list. Violation notices issued that month, fines assessed, deadlines approaching. She read each one aloud. Homeowner name, address, amount owed, in front of the entire room. No discussion, no context, no opportunity for the named homeowner to respond. One man near the back raised his hand. I sent an appeal 2 weeks ago about the fence color. I never heard back. Diane didn't look up from her papers. Appeals are processed in order. Next item. That was it. That was the whole exchange. The man lowered his hand and stared at the floor. Nobody else spoke for the rest of the meeting. I sat there watching. 20 homeowners in folding chairs, most of them older, most of them quiet, most of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. And at the front, one woman running the room like she had a gavel and a robe. The board members flanking her, 3 men in khakis and polos, nodded at everything she said and added nothing. They were decorative. She was the engine. After the meeting, I struck up a conversation with Mrs. Shelton in the parking lot. She was polite, but careful. I asked how long Diane had been president. 6 years, she said. Nobody runs against her. Nobody wants to? She looked at me for a moment, then said, nobody wants to deal with what happens if they do. Over the next few weeks, I started picking up the pattern. Not by investigating, just by paying attention. Diane had a system. She didn't target everyone equally. She targeted people she perceived as problems. People who questioned her. People who didn't attend her annual HOA gala. People who, for whatever reason, she decided didn't fit. The young couple at the end of the cul-de-sac, the ones who'd signed the welcome card, had been fined $300 for parking a work truck in their driveway overnight. The husband was a contractor. The truck had his company logo on the side. Diane told them it was a commercial vehicle violation. There was no such rule in the CC&Rs. They paid anyway. A retired teacher on Maple Court was threatened with a lien over a garden gnome, not a collection of gnomes. One gnome, about 8 inches tall, sitting next to her mailbox. Diane said it was a non-conforming lawn ornament and gave her 72 hours to remove it or face a $500 fine. The woman removed it the same afternoon. And then there was Mrs. Shelton, fined $800 for a terracotta flower pot on her front step. The violation notice cited unapproved exterior color palette. The pot was the same shade of brown as the mulch in every yard on the street. She was 72 years old, living on a fixed income, and she paid it without a word because she didn't know she could fight it. That was Diane's real power. Not the bylaws, not the board, not even the fines themselves. It was the belief she had installed in every homeowner in that neighborhood. The belief that she could do whatever she wanted and there was nothing anyone could do about it. I noticed something else, too. Certain homes never got notices. The families who donated to the annual gala, the couples who served on Diane's advisory committee, the homeowner who let Diane use his driveway for overflow parking during board events. They were untouchable. Same neighborhood, same rules, different enforcement. The rules were real. The enforcement was personal. About a week after I moved in, I found a typed letter in my mailbox. No stamp, hand-delivered. It was printed on paper with a header that read, Office of the HOA President, as though that were a government title. The letter listed 4 pre-violations on my property. My garage door had been left open after 6 p.m. My porch light was non-standard wattage. My side yard had unapproved ground cover, and my trash bins had been visible from the street on a non-collection day, which was true because I'd brought them out 12 hours early for a 6 a.m. pickup. 4 violations, my first week, before I'd even finished unpacking. I read the letter twice, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. I didn't call her. I didn't knock on her door to argue. That silence, that one act of simply not reacting, was the thing Diane Kowalski could not tolerate. Because in her neighborhood, when the president sent a letter, people responded, they apologized, they complied. They showed up at the next meeting with their heads down and their checkbooks open. I did none of those things. And from that moment on, I became her project. Scene 3, Confrontation 1, a threat, escalate 1. 3 months. That's how long Diane waited before she decided that letters weren't enough. In those 3 months, I received 14 violation notices. 14. Each one printed on the same Office of the HOA President letterhead. Each one citing a different bylaw. Each one demanding payment within 15 days. Fence stain 2 shades too dark. Garage door left open past 6 p.m. Twice. Landscape lighting, non-conforming to community aesthetic standards. A garden hose left coiled on the side of the house in plain view. Patio furniture that was unapproved material. A recycling bin visible from the street for 45 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon. 14 notices, 14 fines, totaling $4,200. I didn't pay a single one. Not because I was trying to pick a fight, because I read the CC&Rs, the actual recorded governing documents of the association. And half the bylaws Diane cited didn't exist. The other half didn't say what she claimed they said. Bylaw 7.2, for example, covered exterior paint and surface finishes. It said nothing about fence stain shade. Bylaw 9.1 addressed temporary storage of waste receptacles. It gave homeowners 24 hours after collection day. I'd had my bins out for 12. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was manufacturing them. Then she came to my driveway. It was a Saturday morning. I was checking the mail when a white SUV pulled up to my curb. Diane stepped out first, clipboard in hand. Always the clipboard. Behind her came one of the board members, Rick Calloway. Tall, quiet, the kind of man who'd agree with whoever was standing closest to him. They didn't come to the door. They stood in my driveway, and Diane raised her voice before I'd even turned around. Mr. Harris, you owe this association $4,200 in outstanding fines. If you don't pay by the 15th, we will file a lien against your property. She said it the way as someone reads a parking ticket. No hesitation, no warmth. Just numbers and a deadline. I walked to the end of the driveway, kept my voice level. Show me the vote authorizing these fines. I don't need a vote, she said. I'm the president. I looked at Rick. Is that in the bylaws? Which section? Rick opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Diane. She didn't help him. The board has full authority over enforcement, Diane said, stepping in. It's in the governing documents. Which section? I asked again. Silence. She changed direction the way a current changes when it hits a rock. Fast, smooth. Without acknowledging the turn. She shifted from legal authority to social pressure, which was always her stronger weapon anyway. Every other homeowner in this community complies with the standards, she said, louder now. Not for my benefit, for the audience. Every single one. You're the only problem in this neighborhood, Mr. Harris. The only one. 2 houses down, Mr. Tanaka was washing his car. His hands had stopped moving. The sponge sat on the hood, dripping suds onto the concrete. He wasn't even pretending not to listen. Diane didn't care. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the street to see her standing in a man's driveway telling him he was the problem. In her mind, this was governance. In reality, it was theater. I didn't take the bait, didn't raise my voice, didn't point out that her full authority was a phrase she'd invented, or that the CC&Rs required a majority board vote for any fine over $200, or that a lien couldn't be filed without a recorded vote and written notice with a 30-day cure period. I knew all of that. I'd read it 3 times. But this wasn't the moment to play those cards. I'll review the documents, I said. Good afternoon, Diane. I turned and walked back toward the porch. Behind me, I heard her say to Rick, not quietly, not meant to be private, if he thinks money makes him untouchable, he's about to learn how this neighborhood works. I stopped walking, not because the words hurt, because I wanted to remember them. Exactly, word for word. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it HOA. Then I did something I should have done after the first notice but hadn't, because I'd still been giving Diane the benefit of the doubt. I photographed every single violation notice she'd sent me, all 14. I cross-referenced each one against the actual CC&Rs. I logged the dates, the claimed bylaw sections, and what those sections actually said or didn't say. I created a spreadsheet, 1 column for Diane's claim, 1 column for the actual governing language, 1 column for the discrepancy. 11 of the 14 citations referenced bylaws that either didn't exist or were materially misquoted. The remaining 3 cited real bylaws but applied them to situations they didn't cover. 14 for 14, a perfect record of fabrication. I saved the file, backed it up, then I opened a physical manila folder, the same one I'd placed the red violation notice in after the deputy left, and started printing. I didn't tell Diane. I didn't tell anyone. There was no confrontation to be had yet, no dramatic speech, no courtroom moment, just a man sitting at a desk, late at night, building a file 1 page at a time. She said I had until the 15th. She didn't know I'd already started counting, but I wasn't counting days. I was counting her violations. Scene 4, neighbors and first receipts, reveal plus proof 1. 2 weeks after the driveway confrontation, someone knocked on my door. It was a Tuesday evening, just after 7. I opened the door expecting a delivery driver. Instead, I found Mr. Tanaka standing on my porch with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking like a man who'd been walking back and forth on the sidewalk for 10 minutes before deciding to come up the steps. "Hey," he said, "you got a minute?" I invited him in. He declined, stayed on the porch, spoke quietly even though the nearest neighbor was 60 feet away. "I heard what she said to you in the driveway, all of it." I nodded. "I figured. She's done it before," he said. "Not just to you, to a lot of us." He told me he'd been fined 3 times in the past 2 years. Once for a basketball hoop his son used in the driveway, unauthorized recreational structure. Once for leaving his garage door open while he worked on his car, same violation they'd cited me for, and once for a patch of crabgrass near his mailbox that Diane called landscape neglect. Total fines, $1,100. He paid every one. "Why?" I asked. He shrugged, the kind of shrug that carries weight. "I've got 2 kids, a mortgage. She told me if I didn't pay, she'd put a lien on my house and report it to the credit agencies. I didn't know if she could actually do that. I didn't want to find out." He paused, looked out at the street. "There are at least 5 other families who feel the same way. Maybe more, but nobody wants to go on record. They're afraid of what she'll do next. More fines, more letters, getting called out by name at the meetings." I asked him if he'd be willing to write down what he saw in my driveway. The confrontation, the lien threat, all of it. Just a written account. Dated and signed. He thought about it for a long moment. Then he said, "Yeah, I'll do it. Someone has to start." He went home that night and wrote 2 pages. Brought them back the next morning, folded in an envelope like he was passing a secret note in school. I read it, thanked him, and added it to the folder. That weekend I went to see Mrs. Shelton. She invited me in, tea, cookies, the whole routine. Her house was small and immaculate, photographs of her late husband on every shelf, a crocheted blanket on the sofa that looked like it had been there since the 90s. She was kind and careful and tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. I asked her about the fines. At first, she deflected. "Oh, it's just the way things are around here." But when I told her about the 14 notices I'd received, about the bylaws that didn't exist, about the lien threat in my driveway, she got quiet. Then she stood up and left the room. She came back carrying a shoebox. Inside were fine notices, dozens of them, going back 4 years, each one printed on the same Office of the HOA President letterhead, each one with a different violation: unapproved welcome mat, visible recycling bin, wind chimes exceeding ambient noise thresholds, a holiday wreath left up 2 days past January 1st, and the terracotta flower pot, the $800 fine for a pot that was the same shade of brown as every mulch bed on the street. That one was right on top, as if she'd looked at it more than the others. I asked her the total. She didn't know exactly. She'd paid every single fine the day she received it because she didn't know she could challenge them, and because she was afraid of losing her home. I added them up on my phone while she watched. $6,140. She looked at the number on my screen and said very quietly, "That's my property tax for the year." I didn't say anything for a moment. I just sat there with a shoebox full of manufactured violations on my lap, across from a 72-year-old widow who had paid an entire year's property tax to a woman who had no legal authority to collect a dime of it. I asked if I could photograph the notices. She said yes. I asked if she'd be willing to provide a written statement about her experience. When the fines started, how they were delivered, what she was told would happen if she didn't pay. She hesitated. "I don't want trouble," she said. "Mrs. Shelton," I said, "you've been paying for trouble you didn't cause for 4 years. I'm not asking you to fight, I'm asking you to tell the truth." She wrote her statement that afternoon, 3 pages in careful handwriting on lined notebook paper. She signed it at the bottom with a hand that shook slightly, and she asked me not to use it unless I had to. I promised her I wouldn't, not until it mattered. The following Monday, I drove to the county recorder's office. It was a 30-minute drive to the county seat, a gray building with fluorescent lights and clerks who moved at government speed. I requested copies of the HOA's original governing documents, the CC&Rs, the Articles of Incorporation, and any recorded amendments. The clerk pulled the file. It took about 20 minutes. When she handed me the stack, I sat at a table in the lobby and started reading. The original CC&Rs were clean, standard, unremarkable. Standard suburban HOA governance. Amendment procedure clearly stated on page 14. Any modification to the bylaws required a 2/3 vote of all homeowners, with results recorded in official meeting minutes and the amended documents filed with the county recorder within 60 days. I checked the amendment index. Last recorded amendment, 7 years ago. 1 entry. A change to the pool hours schedule. That was it. Diane's updated bylaws, the ones she'd been enforcing for the past 2 years. The ones she used to fine Mrs. Shelton and Mr. Tanaka and the retired teacher and the young couple and me had never been voted on, never been approved by 2/3 of homeowners, never been filed with the county. They didn't exist, not legally, not in any way that mattered. Every fine issued under those bylaws was unenforceable. Every lien threat was baseless. Every dollar Mrs. Shelton had paid, all 6,140 of it, had been collected under rules that had no legal standing. I made copies, paid the $4 fee, drove home. I didn't call Diane. I didn't send her a letter. I didn't knock on her door and wave the documents in her face. That would have felt good for about 30 seconds, and then she would have lawyered up and started covering her tracks. Instead, I went home, sat at my desk, and added the county recorder's documents to the manila folder. It was getting thick now. Written statements from Mr. Tanaka and Mrs. Shelton. 14 photographed violation notices with cross-referenced bylaw analysis. And now the official governing documents proving that the rules Diane had been enforcing were rules she had written herself, approved herself, and filed nowhere. I closed the folder and set it on the corner of my desk. This had started as my problem, one man on a porch being told to leave his own home. But it wasn't about me anymore. It was about 96 homeowners who had been living under a system that was built on nothing, enforced by a woman whose only real power was the belief that nobody would ever check. I was checking. Scene 5, Escalate 2, Heavy Hit Stakes Ladder. The lien arrived on the Wednesday. I pulled it from my mailbox between a utility bill and a furniture catalog. A county-stamped document, officially recorded, attaching $4,200 in unpaid HOA fines to my property. My name, my address, my home, a $5 million estate with a $4,000 cloud on the title, put there by a woman who had manufactured every penny of it. For most homeowners in that neighborhood, this would have been the end of the road. A lien means your title is dirty. It means complications when you sell, when you refinance, when you apply for a line of credit. It means the HOA can, in theory, begin foreclosure proceedings. Take your house over an amount of money most people spend on a vacation. Diane knew that. She was counting on it. The lien wasn't a legal tool. It was a psychological weapon. Pay or lose everything. I didn't pay. I photographed the document, logged the recording number, and added it to the folder. But the lien wasn't the heavy hit. What came next was, 4 days later, I found a letter in my mailbox on the same Office of the HOA President letterhead. This one had a different tone, bolder, more official sounding. The subject line read, Emergency Access Order, Immediate Compliance Required. The letter stated that the HOA had identified potential structural compliance violations in my backyard and was exercising its right to conduct an emergency inspection. I had 48 hours to provide access or face enforcement action, including but not limited to contractor engagement and law enforcement involvement. I read it twice. There was no such right in the CC&Rs. There was no emergency inspection clause. There was no provision allowing the HOA president to unilaterally authorize access to a homeowner's private property. Diane had written herself a permission slip on HOA letterhead and expected me to treat it like a court order. I didn't respond. I didn't open my gate. I didn't call her. On day 3, I was out, grocery run, gone for about 90 minutes. When I got home, I set the bags on the kitchen counter, poured a glass of water, and sat down at my desk to check the security cameras. I always checked them. Habit from 22 years in law enforcement. You check your perimeter the way other people check their email. The porch camera showed nothing unusual. Front yard, clean. Driveway, empty. Then I pulled up the side gate camera. There she was, Diane Kowalski, standing at my side gate at 2:47 p.m., accompanied by a man I'd never seen before. He was carrying a leather tool bag, a locksmith. She had brought a locksmith to my property while I was gone, and she was pointing at my gate lock and telling him to open it. The audio was faint but clear enough. I turned up the volume. "This is HOA common property," Diane said, gesturing at the gate. "We have authority to access. Open it." The locksmith looked at the lock, then back at her. "Do you have documentation? A work order? Something from the homeowner?" Diane held up her clipboard, and waved it in his general direction. "This is the authorization. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association." The locksmith hesitated. He crouched down, examined the lock, tried something. The lock didn't move. I'd replaced the original gate hardware 3 weeks after moving in. Deadbolt, reinforced strike plate, keyed on both sides. Not because I was expecting Diane Kowalski to show up with a locksmith, because I believed in good locks. After about 2 minutes of examination, the locksmith stood up, shook his head, and said something I couldn't quite make out. They spoke for another minute. Then they left. Diane walked quickly, clipboard under her arm, not looking back. The locksmith followed at a distance, like a man who was starting to realize he'd been brought to the wrong job. Total time on my property, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Every second of it recorded, time-stamped, saved. I sat at my desk and watched the footage 3 times. My jaw was tight, my hands were steady. But something had shifted. This wasn't fines anymore. This wasn't letters or driveway lectures or threats about deadlines. This was a woman bringing a stranger to my home while I was gone and attempting to physically breach my gate. That's trespass, not metaphorical trespass, not bureaucratic overreach, criminal trespass. I saved the footage to 2 separate drives, printed a still frame, Diane at the gate, clipboard in hand, locksmith crouching at the lock, added it to the folder. I wrote the date, the time, and a 1-line description on the back of the printout. Unauthorized entry attempt, no court order, no homeowner consent, no legal basis. I didn't call the police, not yet. The footage wasn't going anywhere, and I knew, from 2 decades of working with officers, deputies, and prosecutors, that evidence is most powerful when it's presented at the right moment, not the earliest moment. 2 days after the gate incident, Diane called the police again. Different complaint this time. She reported that I had erected unauthorized structures that were blocking HOA access to common areas adjacent to my property. A patrol officer came out, walked the property line, looked at my fence, my gate, my yard. He found nothing. No unauthorized structures, no blocked access, no violation of any kind. He left without issuing a citation, but the report was filed. I went to the station the next day and requested a copy. The officer's notes were brief and clear. No violation observed. Complainant unable to specify which structure was unauthorized. I added the report to the folder. Then came the meeting. I wasn't there. I chose not to be. But Mr. Tanaka was, and he texted me a summary within the hour. Diane had called a board session, not a full homeowner meeting, just the board plus whoever showed up. About 15 people came. Diane stood at the front and made an announcement that Mr. Tanaka transcribed almost word for word. We have a homeowner who refuses to comply with community standards. He has ignored multiple notices, refused to pay legally assessed fines, and obstructed the board's ability to conduct property inspections. The board is now considering all available legal options, including forced sale proceedings. Forced sale. She said it in front of 15 people. She was telling the neighborhood she could take my home. Mr. Tanaka said Mrs. Shelton was in the back row. She didn't say anything. She just stared at her hands. I read Mr. Tanaka's text 3 times. Then I set my phone down and looked at the manila folder on my desk. It was thick now. Tanaka's written statement, Shelton's statement, the county recorder's CC&Rs, the photographed notices, the spreadsheet, the security footage, the police report, the lien, the emergency access order, the still frame of Diane at my gate. 43 pages, and every single one of them had her name on the wrong side. She told 96 families she could force me out of my home. What she didn't know was that the folder sitting 3 feet from my right hand wasn't a collection of grievances. It was a case file, built the way I'd been trained to build them, methodical, complete, and ready to open at the moment it would do the most damage. She had the microphone, she had the board, she had the clipboard and the letterhead, and the title she wore like a crown. I had receipts, and I wasn't done collecting. Scene 6, False Peak plus Public Arena. The invitation arrived in every mailbox on a Monday morning. Not a regular meeting notice, not a quarterly budget update. This was printed on heavier stock than usual, with a red border I'd never seen on any HOA communication before. The header read, Special Community Meeting, mandatory attendance strongly encouraged. Below it, 1 agenda item. Vote to authorize legal action against the non-compliant homeowner at 14 Ridgecrest Lane. She didn't use my name. She used my address. Everyone in the neighborhood knew whose address it was. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse. I knew about it before the invitation hit my mailbox. Mr. Tanaka had texted me a photo of his copy at 8:14 that morning. His message was 2 words. She's serious. I spent the next 3 days doing nothing visible. Didn't call Diane, didn't send a letter, didn't reach out to any board members, didn't knock on a single neighbor's door to lobby for votes. I went to work, came home, mowed my lawn, and sat on my porch. But I did one thing. I took the manila folder off my desk, checked every page, and placed it in a plain envelope. I sealed the envelope. I set it by the front door. Thursday evening, I drove to the clubhouse. The parking lot was already half full when I arrived at 6:45. I'd never seen more than 20 homeowners at any HOA meeting. There were already 30 cars. By the time the meeting started, over 40 people had filed into the room, the largest turnout in the history of the association. Diane had made sure of that. She wanted an audience. She wanted this to feel official. She wanted 40-plus homeowners to watch her take down the one man who had refused to bend. The clubhouse was the same room I'd visited 3 years ago. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, the long board table at the front. But tonight it felt different, smaller, tighter. The chairs were arranged in rows facing the board table, and Diane had set up an easel with a poster board next to a laptop connected to a projector. She'd come prepared. I walked in quietly and sat in the second row, middle seat, manila folder on my lap. I didn't make eye contact with Diane. I didn't need to. She saw me the moment I entered. I caught the briefest pause in her expression. Not fear, not surprise, just a flicker of recalculation. She hadn't expected me to show. She recovered in half a second and began. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know this is unusual, calling a special meeting on short notice, but we have a situation that affects every homeowner in this community, and I believe it's important that we address it together. Her voice was measured, practiced. She spoke the way people speak when they've rehearsed in front of a mirror and timed it with a stopwatch. She clicked the projector. The first slide was a photograph of my house, taken from the street, zoomed in with a red circle around my side gate. The next slide, my front yard with a red circle around what appeared to be a coiled garden hose. The next, my porch, with a red circle around the light fixture she'd cited as non-standard wattage in violation number 3. 6 slides, 6 red circles, 6 manufactured problems presented as evidence of community decay. Then came the spreadsheet. She'd printed it large enough to fill the poster board on the easel. My address at the top. Below it, a list of every fine she'd assessed. Dates, amounts, bylaw citations, and a running total in red at the bottom, $4,200. This homeowner, Diane said, tapping the poster with the back of her pen, has been assessed fines on 14 separate occasions over the past 3 months. He has not paid a single one. He has not responded to a single notice. He has not attended a single meeting to present an appeal. And when the board attempted a lawful property inspection, he refused access and obstructed our representatives. Lawful property inspection. She called the locksmith incident a lawful property inspection. I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the poster board and let her talk. She talked for 20 minutes, uninterrupted. Not a single homeowner raised a hand. Not a single board member offered context or correction. Rick Calloway sat at the board table with his hands folded, staring at a spot on the wall above everyone's heads. The other 2 board members flanked Diane like bookends, decorative and silent. Mrs. Shelton was in the last row. I didn't turn around, but I could feel her there, the way you feel someone watching you in a quiet room. Mr. Tanaka was 4 seats to my left, sitting very still. Nobody spoke. The room was Diane's. Every chair, every pair of eyes, every breath of air in that clubhouse belonged to her, and she knew it. Then she brought out the resolution. She held up a single sheet of paper, the draft resolution authorizing the HOA's attorney to begin foreclosure proceedings against 14 Ridgecrest Lane. She read it aloud slowly, making sure every word landed. Whereas the homeowner at the above-referenced address has demonstrated a pattern of willful noncompliance. Whereas all reasonable attempts at resolution have been exhausted. The board hereby authorizes legal counsel to initiate proceedings for the recovery of outstanding assessments, including but not limited to foreclosure on the subject property. Foreclosure over manufactured fines on a $5 million estate in front of 40 people. She set the resolution on the table and looked at the room. I'll open the floor for a vote in 5 minutes, but before we proceed, I want everyone to know that this board takes enforcement seriously, which is why I've already contacted the sheriff's department. She paused, letting it land. A deputy will be arriving shortly to serve formal notice to the homeowner in question. This is not punitive. This is procedural. I want you all to see that this board operates within the law and with the full support of local law enforcement. She looked directly at me for the first time. A small, satisfied expression. Not quite a smile. Something worse. The look of a woman who believed she had already won and was now simply enjoying the ceremony. She had called the deputy herself, arranged it herself, timed it herself. She wanted a uniform in the room. She wanted 40 homeowners to see a sheriff's deputy standing next to her serving me papers validating everything she had built tonight. The slides, the spreadsheet, the resolution, the narrative. She wanted the badge to be her final stamp of authority. I sat still. The folder was warm on my lap. I didn't open it. 2 minutes passed, then 3. The room was silent. Someone's phone buzzed. A chair creaked. Diane checked her watch, then the door. Then, a car door outside. A firm, measured footstep on the walkway. The front door of the clubhouse opened. The deputy stepped in. He was in full uniform, hat, badge, belt. He stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the room the way officers do. Perimeter first, faces second. His eyes moved across the rows of homeowners, past the board table, past Diane's poster board and projector. Then they found me. He walked down the center aisle, past the folding chairs, past Diane, past Rick Calloway and the 2 silent board members. He stopped at the second row, looked down at me, and extended his hand. Good to see you, sir. It's been a while. I stood, shook his hand. The room didn't make a sound. Diane's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She looked at the deputy, then at me, then back at the deputy like she was watching the same movie with the same missing scene as the afternoon on my lawn. Except this time, 40 people were watching with her. The deputy turned to face the room, then he looked at Diane. Ma'am, I was told there was a situation that required my presence. What exactly is the issue here? Diane's voice came back, but thinner now. Faster. She started talking about violations, about non-compliance, about the resolution. She pointed at the poster board. She held up the foreclosure document. The deputy listened. Then he asked the same question he'd asked on my porch 3 weeks ago. Do you have a court order? I don't need... Ma'am. Same voice, same calm, final tone. 40 people heard it this time. Without a court order, this is a civil matter between the association and the homeowner. My department doesn't enforce HOA resolutions. Diane stood behind her board table, in front of her slides, next to her spreadsheet, holding her unsigned resolution. And for the first time since I'd moved into that neighborhood, she had nothing to say. I didn't speak. Not yet. I let the silence do what silence does in a room full of people who've just watched power collapse in real time. Then I picked up the manila folder, set it on my lap, and unsealed the envelope. If the board doesn't mind, I said, I'd like to respond. Scene 7, main reveal, plus supporting receipts, plus reaction cascade, climax. I stood up slowly, no rush, no anger, just a man with a folder stepping into the aisle. The room was still processing what had just happened, the deputy walking past their HOA president to shake hands with the man she'd called him to remove. 40-plus people sitting in folding chairs, realizing that the story they'd been told for the past 20 minutes might not be the only version. I walked to the front of the room, set the manila folder on the edge of the board table. Diane was standing 3 feet to my left. She hadn't moved since the deputy's handshake. Her clipboard was still in her hand, but she wasn't holding it like a weapon anymore. She was holding it like a railing. I didn't look at her, I looked at the room. My name is David Harris, I said. I live at 14 Ridgecrest Lane. I've owned that property for 3 years, and I think it's important, before anyone votes on anything tonight, that you hear a few things Mrs. Kowalski left out of her presentation. I opened the folder. First, since Mrs. Kowalski has questioned whether I belong in this neighborhood, let's start with that. I held up the first document, my property deed, recorded with the county, stamped, dated, notarized. I turned it so the room could see the seal. I am the titled legal owner of 14 Ridgecrest Lane. I purchased the home outright. No mortgage, no cosigner, no dispute of any kind on the title, until Mrs. Kowalski filed a lien based on fines she created without a board vote. I set the deed on the table, let it sit there, didn't explain it further. The room was quiet, not the polite quiet of an HOA meeting, the heavy quiet of people recalculating. Diane opened her mouth. Mr. Harris, ownership was never the issue. The issue is your refusal to comply with... I'll get to compliance, I said. Not loud, not sharp, just firm enough to fill the room. Let's talk about the rules first. I pulled the second document from the folder, the certified copy of the CC&Rs from the county recorder's office. I held it up, turned to the amendment index page, page 14, and read one line aloud. Any modification to the association bylaws requires a 2/3 vote of all homeowners, with results recorded in meeting minutes and amended documents filed with the county recorder within 60 days. I looked up from the page. The last recorded amendment to this association's governing documents was filed 7 years ago. It changed the pool hours. That's it. Everything since then. Every new rule, every new fine category, every updated bylaw that Mrs. Kowalski has been enforcing for the past 2 years was never voted on by this community, never filed with the county, and under state law, never legally enforceable. The murmur started in the back row. It moved forward like a wave. Not loud, just the sound of 40 people looking at each other and realizing the same thing at the same time. Mrs. Shelton's hand stopped trembling. I saw it from the front of the room. Her fingers unclenched from her purse strap and settled flat on her knees. It was a small movement, but I noticed it because I knew what it meant. 4 years, $6,140. And she had just heard, for the first time, that none of it was legal. Diane's face didn't crumble. It tightened. Her jaw set. Her eyes narrowed. She was recalculating too, but not the way the room was. She was calculating defense, escape routes, counter-arguments. I could see it. 22 years of reading people across tables and in interview rooms. She wasn't ashamed. She was cornered. Those bylaws were approved by the board, she said. The board has the authority. The board doesn't have that authority, I said. The CC&Rs are clear. Bylaw amendments require a homeowner vote, not a board decision, not a presidential directive. I set the CC&Rs on the table next to the deed. You can read it yourself. Page 14. Rick Calloway stared at the document like it was radioactive. He didn't reach for it. I didn't pause long. Didn't let the energy drop. I pulled out my phone. Second item. On the 14th of last month, at approximately 2:47 p.m., Mrs. Kowalski came to my property with a locksmith while I was not home. She instructed him to open my side gate. She told him it was, and I quote, HOA common property. I turned the phone screen toward the front row and pressed play. The room saw what my camera saw. Diane at the gate, the locksmith crouching, Diane waving her clipboard, the locksmith trying the lock and failing. 4 minutes and 12 seconds of footage, time-stamped and date-stamped, playing on a 6-inch screen in a silent room. Nobody breathed. When the clip ended, I lowered the phone. My side gate is not HOA common property. It is part of my private residence. Entering or attempting to enter without the homeowner's consent and without a court order is criminal trespass under state law. I have not yet filed charges, but the footage is preserved. I let that sit. Diane didn't speak. Her eyes were on the phone. Her mouth was a thin line. The locksmith clip had done something the CCNRs hadn't. It had made the room see her, not as a president making tough decisions, as a woman standing at someone's locked gate trying to break in. A man in the third row, someone I didn't know, leaned over to the woman next to him and whispered something. She shook her head slowly. 2 homeowners near the back stood up, gathered their jackets, and walked out. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Leaving was the statement. I held up 2 sheets of paper, the police reports. Mrs. Kowalski has called the sheriff's department to my property twice. The first time, she told the deputy I was an unauthorized occupant who needed to be removed. The second time, she reported unauthorized structures blocking HOA access. I read from the officer's notes on the second report. No violation observed, complainant unable to specify which structure was unauthorized. I looked at the deputy, who was standing near the door with his arms folded. Deputy, in your department's experience, what typically happens when someone files repeated reports that officers consistently find to be without basis? He didn't answer the question directly. He didn't need to. He shifted his weight, looked at Diane, and said, "Ma'am, I'd recommend you consult with an attorney before filing any further reports or taking any further action regarding this homeowner or this association. My department will be reviewing the reports filed under your name." The silence that followed was the loudest sound in the room. Mr. Tanaka spoke from the seat, didn't stand, didn't raise his hand, just said it clear and steady. "I'd like the record to show that I personally witnessed Mrs. Kowalski threaten Mr. Harris with forced removal in his own driveway 3 months ago. I have a written, dated, and signed statement to that effect." Then Mrs. Shelton, from the last row. A voice I almost didn't recognize because in 3 years I had never heard her speak above a conversational whisper. "I have 4 years of fines I'd like reviewed." The room turned to look at her, 72 years old, sitting in a folding chair in the back row of a clubhouse meeting with a purse on her lap and a tremor in her hands. And she had just spoken louder than anyone in that room had spoken all night. Diane looked at her board members. Rick Calloway was staring at the table. The second board member had picked up his jacket. He stood, walked down the side aisle, and left the room without a word. The third board member stayed seated, but had pushed his chair back from the table, physically distancing himself from the woman next to him. Diane stood alone behind the board table. Her slides were still projected on the wall behind her. Her poster board spreadsheet still sat on the easel. Her unsigned resolution still lay on the table, untouched. All the tools she'd built tonight, the photos, the numbers, the legal language, the deputy she'd summoned, the vote she'd orchestrated, every single one of them had turned around and faced her. She didn't speak, she didn't apologize. She picked up her clipboard, her laptop, and her purse. She walked to the side door of the clubhouse, and she left. The resolution was never voted on. Scene 8, official fallout and social reversal plus healing ending. The meeting ended without a vote. After Diane left through the side door, the room sat in silence for what felt like a full minute, but was probably 15 seconds. Then people started talking. Not to the board, not to me, but to each other. Low voices, quick glances, the kind of conversations that happen when a room full of people realize they've been living under the same lie and nobody had said it out loud until tonight. I didn't stay long. I answered a few questions from homeowners who approached me. Yes, the CCNRs are public record. Yes, you can request a copy from the county. Yes, fines issued under unapproved bylaws are unenforceable. I kept each answer to 2 sentences or less. This wasn't my meeting anymore. It was theirs. Mr. Tanaka walked me to the parking lot. We didn't say much. He shook my hand and said, "Thank you." I told him he was the one who knocked on my door first. He'd earned his own thank you. The legal aftermath moved faster than I expected. My attorney filed a motion to dissolve the lien the following Monday. He attached the county recorder's certified CCNRs, the amendment index showing no recorded changes in 7 years, and a brief noting that every fine underlying the lien had been assessed under bylaws that were never adopted through the process required by the association's own governing documents. The county removed the lien within 11 days. My title was clean again, the same way it had been the day I moved in. The sheriff's department opened a formal review of the reports Diane had filed. I wasn't involved in that process and didn't ask to be. The deputy I knew told me informally that filing repeated false or misleading reports could result in charges, but that the department would handle it through their own review procedures. I left it there. I had no interest in putting Diane in handcuffs. That was never the point. What I did know was this. Within a week of the meeting, Diane's own attorney contacted the HOA's registered agent and recommended in writing that she resign from the board immediately. The letter cited potential personal liability for unauthorized fines, the trespass incident, and the fabricated enforcement documents. It recommended resignation as the fastest way to limit her legal exposure. Diane resigned 3 days later. A one-paragraph letter delivered to the board, effective immediately, no apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of anything that had happened at the meeting or in the 3 years before it, just a resignation. It was posted in the HOA's next newsletter, a single line in a gray box at the bottom of page 2. The board acknowledges the resignation of Diane Kowalski as HOA president, effective immediately. Nobody I spoke to was surprised, nobody objected, nobody wrote a letter defending her. The financial cleanup took longer, but it happened. The remaining board members, Rick Calloway and the one who hadn't walked out, appointed a temporary interim chair. Their first official act was a vote to void all fines issued under Diane's unapproved bylaws. The vote was unanimous. It took less than 5 minutes. Mrs. Shelton received a refund check for $6,140. I know because she called me the day it arrived. She didn't say much, just that the check was in her hand and that she'd been staring at it for 20 minutes. I told her she'd earned every penny of it. She laughed, a short, surprised laugh like she hadn't expected to, and said, "I think I'll buy a new flower pot." Mr. Tanaka's $1,100 was refunded the following week. The young couple at the end of the cul-de-sac got their $300 back. The retired teacher on Maple Court received $500. Several other homeowners filed for review over the next month. The total amount refunded across the neighborhood came to just over $19,000. $19,000 collected under rules that had never legally existed. The association billed Diane personally for the locksmith invoice and the HOA's legal consultation fees incurred during the fallout. The total came to approximately $8,500. I don't know if she paid. I didn't ask. It wasn't my business anymore. The social shift was quieter than I expected and more complete. There was no dramatic confrontation. No shouting match at the mailboxes. No neighbors egging Diane's house or leaving angry notes on her car. What happened was simpler and in some ways harder to watch. People just stopped. They stopped waving at her. Stopped making eye contact at the grocery store. Stopped including her in the neighborhood text chain that someone had started after the meeting. She wasn't attacked. She was simply no longer part of the community she had spent 6 years claiming to lead. I saw her once, about 3 weeks after the meeting. She was pulling out of her driveway as I was walking to my mailbox. She looked straight ahead. I didn't wave. She didn't slow down. That was the last interaction we ever had, if you could even call it that. Mr. Tanaka and 2 other homeowners formed a temporary governance committee to rewrite the bylaws, properly this time. They held 3 open sessions over the following 2 months. Every proposed change was discussed, voted on, and recorded. The final documents were filed with the county recorder before the end of the quarter. 41 homeowners voted. The approval rate was unanimous. Mr. Tanaka told me later that the new bylaws were about 1/3 the length of Diane's version. "Turns out," he said, "you don't need 60 pages of rules when you're not trying to control people." And then it was over. Not with a bang, not with a courtroom scene or a news van or a dramatic speech on the courthouse steps. It ended the way most things end when the truth finally comes out, slowly, and then all at once, and then quietly. I went back to my life, the life I'd moved here for in the first place, Saturday mornings with coffee on the porch, the sound of Mr. Tanaka's lawnmower across the street, the smell of Mrs. Shelton's garden, which had gotten noticeably bigger since the refund check arrived. One afternoon, about a month after everything settled, there was a knock at my door. I opened it and found Mrs. Shelton standing on my porch holding a terracotta pot. It was full of yellow marigolds, freshly planted with soil still damp on the rim. "For your front door," she said. I thought it could use something nice. I set it right next to the doorbell camera, right where Diane had slapped that red violation notice the afternoon she tried to have me removed from my own home. $2,500. Bylaw 11.4C, a rule that never existed, issued by a woman who no longer had the power to enforce anything. The pot sat there all summer. Nobody said a word about it. Same porch, same Saturday afternoon. But now the driveway was empty. No cruiser, no clipboard, no woman pointing at me like I was a problem to be solved. Just a quiet street, a terracotta pot full of marigolds, and a neighborhood that finally belonged to itself. I took a sip of my tea and listened to the birds. It was exactly the kind of quiet I'd moved here for.